She was forced to marry a millionaire to honor her family's will, but what he did on wedding night shocked everyone. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Rain taps softly against the tall windows of the Brooks Manor, its echo rolling through the silent hall like a heartbeat of fate. The air smelled of old books, cedar wood, and something colder inevitable. At the center of the long mahogany table sat Elena Brooks, a woman who had spent most of her 26 years painting quiet corners of the world that no one cared to notice. But tonight, every eye in the room was on her. Across from her, the family lawyer adjusted his glasses and unfolded the final page of the will. His voice trembled slightly as he read, "To preserve the Brooks legacy, my granddaughter, Elena, must marry the heir of the Collins family within 30 days of my passing. If she refuses, the estate, including the ancestral home and all assets, will be forfeited to charity. The 11-7 problem, that is will Cap'n, Ian Krubs." The words struck like thunder. Elena's fingers clenched around the edge of her chair. Mary? She barely knew the man. The will spoke of Adrian Collins, the cold, calculating CEO whose name she had only seen in business magazines. At the far end of the table, Adrian sat in silence, one hand resting on the table, his gaze unreadable. He was tall, precise, the kind of man whose presence quieted a room. His voice broke the tension, calm yet sharp enough to cut through the storm outside. "Miss Brooks," he said, his tone almost polite. "You can refuse, of course, but I hear your mother's medical bills are considerable. Perhaps this arrangement benefits us both. There are one of mass of that walled you." Elena turned toward him, her chest tightening. "You mean a transaction?" "A contract," Adrian corrected, his expression unchanging. "Let us be honest. Neither of us believes in fairy tales. This will settle our family's obligations and free you from debt. In return, I secure the estate clause my grandfather tied to the merger." She stared at him, rain sliding down the window behind him like a curtain she could not pull away. The room felt smaller by the second. "And what happens after the contract?" she asked. Adrian leaned back slightly, the faintest trace of fatigue in his eyes. "After 12 months, the marriage dissolves. You keep the house your mother loves. I keep the company. We both walk away unscathed." It was logical. It was heartless. It was survival. Elena lowered her gaze, her throat tightening with unshed tears. She could almost hear her mother's frail voice from the hospital bed, whispering, "Do what you must to save our home, my dear." Outside, thunder rolled again, rattling the windows as if echoing her turmoil. Finally, she whispered, "Fine. Draw up your contract, Mr. Collins." Adrian's eyes softened for just a second, barely visible, almost a trick of the light before his mask returned. "Good," he said, standing. "The paperwork will be ready tomorrow. I will have my driver pick you up at 10. Wanted he remained from same about today. As he left the room, the heavy doors closed with a deep final sound that lingered in the air. Elena sat alone at the table, the fire flickering low. She looked at the family portraits on the wall faces that once smiled down with pride and now seemed to judge her from across generations. Her hand brushed against a silver locket at her throat, the only piece of her mother's jewelry she still had. "I will not cry," she whispered. "Not tonight." But the truth pressed in with every drop of rain on the glass. Tomorrow she would sign away her freedom for a promise she was not sure anyone still believed in. And somewhere in the distance, behind the storm and the city lights, Adrian Collins looked out the window of his penthouse, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. He told himself this marriage was just business, nothing more. Yet, for reasons he could not name, her trembling voice and the fire in her eyes would not leave his mind. The next morning, the city sky was pale and heavy with clouds. Elena stood by the window of her small apartment, watching people hurry through the drizzle below. Her packed suitcase sat beside the worn-out sofa. The lawyer's envelope lay open on the table. Inside was the marriage contract, perfectly printed, cold as the man who had written it. Her phone buzzed. A single message from an unknown number appeared. "My driver is waiting downstairs. A. C." She inhaled deeply, and slipped on her old coat. The elevator groaned as it descended, and when the doors opened, a black sedan was waiting by the curb. The driver stepped out, polite but distant, and held the umbrella for her. The ride to the Collins estate felt longer than it should have. Raindrops streaked down the tinted windows as the city gave way to quiet roads and tall iron gates. The mansion loomed ahead, gray stone, tall columns, and manicured gardens that seemed almost too perfect to be real. Inside, the air smelled faintly of jasmine and wealth. A housekeeper greeted her with a rehearsed smile and led her to the study. Adrian was already there, standing near the fireplace, reading a document. He looked up when she entered, his suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. "You are on time," he said. "That is a good start." Elena's fingers tightened around her purse. "I do not plan on being late for my own signing." A faint smile touched his lips, though it did not reach his eyes. He handed her a pen. "This is simply business. Sign here, and everything else will fall into place." She read each line slowly, the clauses about privacy, public appearances, and the expiration of the marriage after 1 year. One sentence made her pause. Both parties agree to maintain emotional distance. She swallowed hard. "That will not be a problem," she said softly, signing her name. Adrian added his signature beside hers, his strokes confident. Final. "Welcome to the agreement, Mrs. Collins." The housekeeper reappeared with a small velvet box. Inside lay a thin gold band. Adrian took it, slid it onto her finger, and said evenly, "This will do for the ceremony. The real ring can wait until the photographers arrive." Elena stared at the ring. It fit perfectly, as if measured for her long before this day. "Does everything in your life follow a script?" she asked quietly. His voice was calm. "It has to. That is how you survive in my world." Moments later, a notary entered, and within minutes the paperwork was complete. They stood together for a brief photo, smiling for the sake of proof. Then Adrian turned to her, gesturing toward the staircase. "Your room is at the end of the east wing. You will have your privacy. Dinner is served at 7. Attendance is expected." She wanted to say something, anything, but the words would not come. She simply nodded and followed the housekeeper down the long corridor. The walls were lined with portraits of the Collins family. Men in tailored suits, women in pearls, every face solemn. Her room was beautiful yet cold. White sheets, dark wood furniture, and a balcony overlooking the rainy garden. The sound of thunder rolled faintly in the distance. On the dresser, a note waited with Adrian's handwriting. "Do not feel obligated to pretend when we are alone. I respect honesty more than performance." Elena sat on the edge of the bed, tracing the ink with her fingertip. Somewhere, deep down, beneath the fear and confusion, a strange calm settled over her. This was not love, not yet. It was a deal, a cage built from necessity. But even cages have cracks, and through one of them, the first light of something unexpected had begun to slip through. Dinner that evening felt like a ceremony held for strangers. The dining hall stretched endlessly, with a table so long that Elena wondered if it had been built for royalty. Dozens of candles flickered between crystal glasses and silver cutlery, polished to perfection. Every sound, the clink of a fork, the soft hum of the rain outside, seemed louder than it should. Adrian sat at the far end, his posture perfect, his attention divided between a file beside his plate and a silent meal prepared by a chef Elena had yet to meet. The aroma of roasted duck and red wine filled the room, but her appetite was nowhere to be found. "You do not have to look so tense," Adrian said finally, his eyes lifting to meet hers. "It is only dinner, not a negotiation." Elena forced a small smile. "Forgive me, I have never had dinner under a chandelier that cost more than my apartment." That made him pause. Then, to her surprise, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Honesty again. I meant what I wrote earlier. You do not need to pretend here." "I do not think I could if I tried," she replied quietly. He leaned back in his chair, watching her. "You are different from what I expected." Elena looked up, curious despite herself. "What did you expect, Mr. Collins?" "A woman desperate to please," he said. "Someone who would treat this arrangement as an opportunity to climb higher." "But you look like someone who would rather be anywhere else." She set down her fork. "Because that is true." The silence that followed was strange, not cold, but fragile, as if both were afraid to break it. Adrian exhaled softly and signaled to the staff. "You may leave us." When the servants disappeared, the room felt smaller, quieter. Adrian rose and walked toward the tall windows overlooking the garden. I was not lying when I said this marriage benefits us both. My grandfather's condition was the same as yours. His will required that I marry before the company's merger could be finalized. It was the last thing he demanded of me. Elena studied his reflection in the glass. His face, usually carved in composure, looked tired beneath the soft light. You sound like a man living by someone else's map, she said gently. Perhaps, he murmured. But every map leads somewhere. For a moment she saw the weight he carried, the expectations, the loneliness beneath his control. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual calm. He turned toward her again. Tomorrow the staff will take you for a fitting. There will be a small press conference to make the marriage official. I expect you to attend. Of course, she replied. I understand the role I have to play. There was noning as an outplank to this follows in the god. Adrian's gaze lingered on her for a beat too long. You say that as if it costs nothing. It does cost something, she said, her voice low but steady. It costs the version of myself that once believed love should not need a contract. The wind outside picked up, brushing against the glass with a sigh. Adrian nodded once, as though he respected her honesty even when it unsettled him. Get some rest, Mrs. Collins. Tomorrow will be long. When she reached her room, the mansion had grown quiet. She placed her hand over the gold band on her finger, its surface smooth and cold. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the clouds still lingered heavy, waiting. In the silence, she whispered to herself, You wanted a contract, Adrian Collins, but you may have signed something neither of us can control. And with that thought, she turned off the light, unaware that from the corridor below, Adrian stood alone by the staircase, listening to the echo of her footsteps fade into the dark. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Elena's room, painting soft golden lines across the floor. It was her first full day as Mrs. Collins, though the title felt like clothing that did not fit. She stood before the mirror, her hair pinned neatly, a simple cream dress replacing the paint-stained aprons she used to wear in her studio. The reflection staring back at her looked composed, but the unease beneath the surface was impossible to hide. When she stepped into the hall, a young stylist greeted her with nervous enthusiasm. Good morning, Mrs. Collins. Mr. Collins asked me to escort you to the city for your fitting. Elena nodded politely. Thank you. But please call me Elena. The drive into downtown Manhattan was quiet. Her thoughts drifted to her mother's hospital room, the soft beeping of machines and the promise she had whispered before leaving. I will find a way to keep you safe. By the time they arrived at the boutique, photographers were already waiting outside. Elena hesitated, startled by the sudden bursts of camera flashes. The stylist guided her through the doors, and the noise faded into the hush of luxury fabrics and perfume. Inside, Adrian stood near a display of gowns, talking to the boutique manager. He looked up as she entered, his sharp features softening slightly. You handled that well, he said. The press feeds on fear. Never let them see yours. I did not expect cameras, Elena admitted, glancing at the flashes still visible through the glass. They will follow you for a while, Adrian replied calmly. It will fade once they realize you are not the scandal they hope for. Very back the wind tells 4 daughter in a strom and 2 and 20 through. He handed her a dress emerald silk, fitted at the waist, elegant without being loud. Try this one. It suits you. Elena hesitated but took the gown. In the dressing room, she ran her fingers over the smooth fabric. It was beautiful, almost intimidating. When she stepped out, the air shifted. Adrian's eyes lingered on her, not with desire, but with something quieter, almost protective. It fits perfectly, he said finally. You should wear it to the gala next week. She met his gaze, uncertain how to respond. You sound surprised. I am, he said. I did not think elegance could come so naturally to someone who claimed to hate this world. A small smile touched her lips. Maybe I do not hate it. Maybe I just do not belong in it. He looked at her for a moment longer before turning away. Belonging is overrated. Later that afternoon, they stopped at a cafe tucked between glass towers. For a brief moment, without assistants or photographers, they sat across from each other like 2 ordinary people. Do you ever wish you had a different life? She asked quietly. Adrian stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking softly. Every morning at 6, he said. But wishing does not pay debts, and it does not erase legacies. Elena studied him, realizing there was more beneath his controlled exterior than she had thought. You talk about legacy like it is a chain. Israeli said. It is, he replied, one made of expectations and names that I did not choose. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, yet it was not uncomfortable. When they finally returned to the car, the air between them had shifted, no longer hostility, but something fragile, unspoken. As the city blurred past, Elena caught her reflection in the window. A woman trapped in a contract but beginning to see the man behind it. Adrian sat beside her, reading messages on his phone, unaware that for the first time, she was no longer afraid of him. Outside, the clouds broke apart, and sunlight spilled over the skyline, brief, bright, and almost like hope. The night of the charity gala arrived sooner than Elena expected. The Collins estate was alive with movement staff, arranging flowers, tuning instruments, and polishing every surface until the marble floors gleamed like glass. Outside, luxury cars rolled through the gates one by one, headlights slicing through the misty evening. In her room, Elena stood before the mirror again, wearing the emerald gown Adrian had chosen. The dress shimmered beneath the warm light, its color deep and vivid against her pale skin. She adjusted the necklace at her throat, an heirloom from Adrian's family, one she had been told to wear for appearances. The cold metal felt heavy, symbolic of everything she had agreed to bear. A soft knock came at the door. When she turned, Adrian was there, dressed in a black tuxedo that seemed made for him. His hair was perfectly in place, his expression calm and distant as always. Yet for a brief second, his eyes flicked over her with quiet awe. "You are ready," he said. Elena nodded, gathering her composure. "You said the press will be there?" "They will," he replied. "And so will every board member waiting to judge whether my marriage was a strategic decision or a genuine one." "Then I will make sure they see what they need to see," she said. He offered his arm. "Let us survive this night together. Seven servant was Ravel, in a Ross nated, in a great was Rob." The ballroom glittered like a scene from another world. Chandeliers cast golden light across hundreds of guests dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits. As the newlyweds entered, a wave of flashes erupted from the press line. Adrian kept his composure, but Elena could feel the tension in his grip. Every eye followed them as they moved toward the center of the room. Whispers filled the air. "That is her, the artist he married," someone murmured. "She looks out of place." Adrian's voice dropped to a whisper near her ear. "Ignore them." A reporter approached, smiling too brightly. "Mrs. Collins, people are curious. What does it feel like to marry into one of the wealthiest families in New York?" Elena met the reporter's gaze, steady and clear. "It feels like standing in front of 100 strangers and realizing the only thing you can control is how honest you are," she said softly. "Money is loud, but sincerity speaks louder." The crowd quieted for a moment. Even Adrian glanced at her with something close to pride. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of handshakes, polite smiles, and endless questions. Yet for the first time, Elena did not feel like an imposter. She stood tall beside Adrian, speaking with quiet grace, holding her ground among people who had never known struggle. Later, when the music softened and the guests began to dance, Adrian approached her again. "You handled them better than most professionals I know," he said. "I just told the truth," she replied. "That always scares people more than lies." A faint laugh escaped him, rare and genuine. "You may be right." They stood in silence as the orchestra played, the melody low and haunting. For a moment their eyes met, not as strangers bound by paper, but as two people standing on equal ground. As the night wound down, Adrian guided her toward the exit. "You did well tonight," he said quietly. "You may have just convinced half this city that our marriage is real." Elena smiled faintly. "Then I suppose I am earning my keep." But as they walked through the glittering corridor, something in his expression softened, almost uncertain. He did not answer. He only opened the door for her, the faint sound of rain outside mingling with the lingering notes of the orchestra. For the first time, the silence between them did not feel like distance. It felt like possibility. The rain had not stopped by the time they returned home. The soft drizzle followed them all the way from the gala, wrapping the night in silver fog. When the car pulled up before the mansion, Elena hesitated before stepping out. Adrian exited first, holding an umbrella above her without a word. For a man who lived by rules, the gesture felt almost tender. Inside, the house was silent, except for the faint crackle of a fire in the study. Adrian placed his jacket over the armrest and loosened his tie. You should rest, he said quietly. It was a long night. Elena removed her heels, her bare feet sinking into the thick carpet. I am too awake to sleep, she admitted. My head is still spinning. He poured 2 glasses of water and handed her one. You handled the press better than I expected. They like stories with contrast, a poor artist and a cold millionaire. Except it is not a story, she said, taking a sip. It is a contract. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Contracts can be rewritten, he said softly. The firelight flickered between them, throwing gold and shadow across his face. Elena met his gaze and saw something there that unsettled her, a trace of warmth she did not know what to do with. She set the glass down and walked toward the piano near the window. Do you play? She asked. Not anymore, he said. My mother did. She used to fill this house with music. After she passed, it felt wrong to touch the keys. Elena brushed her fingers over the piano lid. She must have loved this room. She did, he replied. She used to say every mansion needs something human in it, music, art, laughter. Otherwise it becomes a museum of loneliness. A1. She smiled faintly. Then maybe it needs art again. He turned toward her. Are you offering to paint? Maybe, she said. But I do not paint walls for decoration. I paint stories. Then paint mine, he said, his tone almost a whisper. Elena froze. The words were simple, but they carried a weight she did not expect. For the first time, he was not the distant CEO who dictated rules and contracts. He was just a man who had forgotten what it meant to be seen. A gust of wind hit the window, and the rain grew heavier. She turned to face him. You are not an easy story to tell. I know, he said. But maybe that is why it should be told. It is a act too. For a moment, they stood there, 2 people from opposite worlds, caught in the fragile quiet between thunderclaps. The world outside blurred, but inside the mansion, something real began to take shape. Something that could not be written into any contract. Adrian broke the silence first. You should get some rest, Elena. Tomorrow we meet the foundation board. They will expect my wife to play the part again. Elena nodded, though her heart was still beating faster than it should. Good night, Mr. Collins. As she turned to leave, he said her name softly, almost carefully. Elena. She paused, waiting. He hesitated, then said simply, Thank you for tonight. She smiled without looking back. You are welcome. When she reached her room, she closed the door and leaned against it, trying to steady herself. The sound of rain filled the silence once more. Somewhere below, Adrian stood alone in the study, staring at the empty chair across from him. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. It was not control. It was not fear. It was hope. The next morning began with the sound of whispers. By the time Elena came down for breakfast, the mansion's staff moved with unusual tension. Phones rang quietly, voices dropped mid-sentence. Something was wrong. Adrian was already in the study, his jaw tight as he flipped through a stack of newspapers spread across the desk. On the front page of each one was the same headline in bold black print. The Millionaire's contract bride, the truth behind the Collins marriage. Her heart sank as she stepped closer. Beneath the headline was a photograph from the gala, their hands linked. Her smile bright, his expression unreadable. But the article beneath it was poison. Someone had leaked the details of their agreement. Every private clause, every condition. Elena froze. Who could have done this? Adrian's eyes lifted to hers, dark and unreadable. My aunt, most likely, he said bitterly. She has wanted the board to revoke my position for years. This was the perfect way to make me look like a fraud. It is the groundament. The silence stretched heavy between them. Elena's throat tightened as she whispered, They will think I married you for money. They already do, he said, but now they have proof to feed on. The phone on his desk began to ring again, sharp and relentless. Adrian ignored it. The board is calling emergency meetings. Investors are panicking. He took a breath, trying to steady himself. This was exactly what she wanted. Elena's hands trembled as she picked up one of the papers. The words blurred before her eyes. A marriage of convenience. A fake romance built for profit. Every line made her stomach twist. I can make a statement, she said finally. I can tell them the truth that I only did this because of the will. Because we were forced. No, Adrian interrupted firmly. If you do that, they will destroy you too. They will dig into your past, your family, everything. I will handle it. She stared at him. Handle it how? By letting them believe I am a liar? He hesitated, the muscles in his jaw tightening. By giving them what they want to see, he said. A man who used a woman to protect his company. Let them blame me. Adrian, she said softly, stepping closer. That is not fair. Neither is the world we live in, he replied. For a moment she saw the cost of his choices carved into his face. The exhaustion, the restraint, the loneliness. He had built an empire on control, and now it was crumbling around him. Before she could speak again, the butler entered quietly. Sir, your aunt is here. She insists on seeing you. Adrian's expression darkened. Of course she is. Moments later, the tall woman swept into the room, dressed in navy silk and confidence. So it is true, she said coldly. You have made a mockery of this family. Do you know what this scandal will do to the company? Adrian stood his ground. What it will do, he said evenly, is show who values truth over appearances. She scoffed. Truth? You bought a wife to keep your shares. You disgust me. Elena flinched, but Adrian's voice stayed calm. You may try to ruin me, but you will not ruin her. His aunt's eyes narrowed. Then you will both fall together. When she left, the room felt colder. Adrian rubbed his temples, exhaustion bleeding through his composure. They will come after everything, he murmured. The contracts, the foundation, even the estate. Elena stepped closer, her voice firm now. Then let them come. You once told me every mansion needs something human in it. Maybe this is the price of that. He looked at her, surprised by the fire in her tone. For the first time, she did not seem fragile. She seemed unbreakable. The rain had stopped outside, but the storm had just begun inside the Collins Empire. 2 days later, the Collins Empire stood on the edge of collapse. News outlets replayed the scandal in endless loops. Investors demanded answers, and rumors flooded every corner of social media. The mansion, once silent and controlled, now buzzed with reporters camped outside the gates. Inside, Adrian barely slept. He spent hours in the study, fielding calls from the board, drafting statements, and tearing them apart before sending any. Elena watched from a distance, knowing there was nothing she could say that would calm the storm. But she also knew one thing with certainty: he was protecting her, even if it meant losing everything. That afternoon, she found him by the fireplace, his tie loosened, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. The board meeting is tonight, he said without looking up. They will demand my resignation. It is only a matter of time. Elena's heart ached at the quiet defeat in his voice. Then let me speak, she said firmly. Let me tell them the truth. He shook his head. You will not stand in that room full of men who have never known compassion. They would eat you alive. Maybe, she said, but at least I would not be silent. Adrian turned to her then, his gaze steady but tired. Why would you risk everything for me? Because you risked everything for me first, she said. Because you could have let them destroy my name, but you did not. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly, throwing warm light across their faces. Then Adrian exhaled slowly and said, If you are going to do this, then you will not go alone. That evening, the boardroom glowed with harsh white light. A dozen men sat around the long polished table, their expressions sharp with judgment. At the head sat Adrian, composed but pale, and beside him, Elena in her emerald dress, standing tall despite the tension in the air. One of the senior members leaned forward. Mr. Collins, this marriage has embarrassed our brand and destabilized our partnerships. You have 48 hours to step down voluntarily or face removal. Adrian's jaw tightened. You are assuming guilt where there is none. None, the man snapped. The contract between you and this woman? Elena interrupted before he could finish. My name is Elena Brooks Collins, she said clearly, and that contract was written by me as much as him. The room fell silent. She continued, her voice calm but strong. Yes, it was a marriage of convenience, but it was also an agreement born from desperation. He needed to protect the company his grandfather built. I needed to save my mother's life. We were both fighting for family, not fame. The men shifted uncomfortably. One of them muttered, That may be true, but public opinion changes faster than truth, she said. And the truth is this. No one forced this man to lie for me. He did it because he still believes in loyalty, even when it costs him everything. Adrian looked at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. For the first time in days, he said nothing, he simply listened. When the meeting ended, silence filled the hall. No one applauded, but no one spoke against them either. The damage was not undone, but something had shifted. Outside, as they stepped into the cold night air, Adrian turned to her. "You did not have to do that," he said quietly. Elena met his gaze. "I know, but I wanted to." He smiled faintly, something rare and unguarded. "You may have saved more than just the company tonight." The wind stirred her hair, carrying the scent of rain again. "Maybe," she said softly. "Or maybe we just told the world what it means to fight for something real." For the first time, the storm of their lies had begun to clear, and what remained beneath it was something neither of them had expected. Something dangerously close to love. Spring arrived quietly, washing the city in light after months of storms. The newspapers that once screamed about scandal had moved on to newer stories, and the Collins name, though bruised, had survived. Investors slowly returned, the company stabilized, and the family that once doubted Adrian's leadership now spoke of his resilience. But for Adrian and Elena, the victory was not measured in headlines or profits. It lived in the silence of small mornings and in the steady rhythm of two people learning to breathe again. 3 months after the board meeting, the mansion no longer felt like a museum. The air smelled of paint and fresh flowers instead of dust and control. Canvases leaned against the walls of the main hall. Elena's work, bold and alive, telling stories of chaos and healing. Adrian had refused to move them to a gallery. This house needed color, he had said. Now it finally has it. One afternoon he found her in the garden, sketching the tulips that had just bloomed near the fountain. She looked up when she sensed him, sunlight catching the faint smile on her lips. "You are early," she said. "I canceled the afternoon meeting," he replied. "The board will survive without me for one day." Elena raised an eyebrow. "That does not sound like the Adrian Collins I know." He sat beside her on the stone bench. "Maybe I am learning there are better things to protect than numbers." For a while, they said nothing. The air was warm, filled with the sound of bees and the trickle of water. Then Adrian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, the same one that had once held their fake wedding ring. But this time, when he opened it, a new ring glimmered inside. A simple band of gold with a small emerald stone. Elena froze. "Adrian." He met her eyes, steady and sincere. "The first time I gave you a ring, it was a condition. The second time, it was a symbol. This time, it is a choice." Tears filled her eyes, though her smile trembled. "Are you sure? After everything we have been through?" "The shadow Argo." He took her hand gently. "I have never been more sure. You taught me that truth is not the end of love, it is the beginning." The wind rustled through the trees as she whispered, "Then yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, the sunlight flashing across the emerald. "It suits you," he said softly. Elena laughed through her tears. "You said that about a dress once." "I was right then too." Later that evening, the mansion filled with soft music. There were no reporters, no guests in glittering gowns, only the staff who had become family, a few close friends, and the quiet joy that comes from peace hard-earned. Adrian and Elena danced under the chandelier that had once made her feel out of place. Now, it cast its light on them like a blessing. As the song ended, he whispered near her ear, "You once told me every mansion needs something human in it. You were right." She smiled, her hand resting over his heart. "And you once said contracts can be rewritten. I guess we just did." Outside, the night was clear for the first time in months. The fountains shimmered beneath the stars, and the faint sound of laughter drifted through the open windows. In that moment, the mansion that had begun as a prison of obligation became what it was always meant to be, a home built not by inheritance but by choice. And as Adrian and Elena held each other close, they both understood the same truth at last. Love, when it is real, does not come from wealth or power. It comes from two hearts brave enough to start again.